policy pitch is less regulation, more babies. It's time to grab the legislative fire extinguisher. Welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number, the podcast where we dig into legislation with the enthusiasm of a toddler in the toy aisle, except for we ask tougher questions and usually require fewer snacks. I'm Sarah, and I'm joined, as always, by the man who treats state legislative trackers like it is bedtime stories, Stephen.
Hello. Now, I'm not saying that I annotate them with the highlighters, but I'm also not saying it.
I know you are. Okay, so today we are talking about childcare legislation, or as it is increasingly being framed, cutting the red tape for the sake of parental choice, which is a lovely way to say fewer regulations and good luck out there. So we have been talking a lot about how the current administration is really wanting American women to start popping out babies. And this is another thing kind of on that trajectory. Even over the last little bit with the tariff war, trade war, all of the different things that are going on, there are things that are still breaking through when it comes to this administration wanting more children. And one of the things that they talked about was this $5,000 child tax credit that they're trying to issue to people to incentivize them to have kids. And one of the funniest things is that that barely covers even 1 month of childcare in the US right now. So that's not really the incentivizer that they might think it is. And I know that a couple weeks ago, we were talking about the maternal and paternal leave because Congress was talking about that, and just some other types of benefits that they have all around the world to make it easier to have kids. And, you know, some of that definitely is maternity and paternity leave, but other things like that do come in the form of money to help you pay for your kid. And I know that the UK has something around that. So can you tell us more?
We do, yes. So we do have various child tax credits as well, so which are quite complicated. But yes, basically you do get a credit paid if you're part of a family that has children. But we also have this thing called child benefit, which has been around for a very long time. And that's basically as soon as you have kids, the government starts giving you money, and they send you money each week. It's not very much, but it's something, and particularly for people on very low income, it can be a bit of a lifeline, really. But the problem with it is that it's capped at 2 kids. So you don't get it for your third child and beyond. And obviously, there are people who have 3 and more children. So this is seen as a bit of a driver for poverty, particularly for people with large families. And so there's been a lot of pressure on the current government, which is a Labour government, is supposed to support these type of things, to remove this cap on 2 children. And various analyses have shown that it would dramatically help to reduce sort of child poverty. But the government's saying, oh, yes, but it would also cost an absolute fortune, and we're broke. We don't have any money at the moment. Terrible financial straits, so we're not going to do that. But it's turned out to be this real sort of dividing issue among people who actually support Labour and support this government. People think it's absolutely terrible. It's absolutely something that they should be doing. But they're just saying we've got to be fiscally responsible and we can't afford it. And this is the problem with all of these kinds of initiatives. Where's the money coming from? If you're not willing to raise taxes to pay for it, how do you pay for it?
And it's also just so interesting. One of the things that I just keep thinking about so much in the political discourse that we're in right now, I love to see people online who are like, if I don't have a kid, my tax money shouldn't be going to public schools. And it's just so hard. I don't know how to explain to you that you benefit from children being educated. Like, you benefit from a society of educated adults, and for educated adults to be educated, they have to get educated as children. Like, and you are in this society. We are all, unfortunately, on this planet together, and we should have this vested interest in all of us being the best possible versions of ourselves. I also feel like that kind of mentality is also what's happening in the Republican Party right now with all of their talk tracks. And they're like, yeah, have more babies, but also we are not going to help you at all. Okay, I mean, let's get into things. So today's episode is about childcare, but it's not this kind of cozy finger painting with story time kind of way. We're actually digging into a wave of legislation that's moving through state houses, and it's trying to make childcare cheaper, sure, but also riskier. It's more loosely supervised and, as a whole, just a lot less accountable. And this isn't just a trend. It's part of a broader political movement that we're seeing here in the US. And we're going to connect it to something that you might have heard whispered around DC, Project 2025.
Yes, it's become a very, very familiar topic, hasn't it? We've covered it in the past. We covered it before the election when we said that this was the Republican playbook for the next Trump administration. Of course, Trump denied that, but it's certainly seeming like it's a very, very important part of the approach to government in 2025. So it's a policy blueprint. It's led by the Heritage Foundation and a coalition of conservative think tanks, and it's a huge tome that lays out the whole playbook for this current Republican administration. And that includes quite a lot on childcare. And spoiler alert, it's not about funding more pre-K. It's about shrinking the federal role, loosening regulations, and favoring faith-based, unlicensed, or home-based care as preferred alternatives to formal childcare centers.
Okay, so what we're seeing in state bills, it's not random, it's a strategy. Let's start with Idaho, where House Bill 243 kicked off national controversy earlier this year.
So yes, exactly. So HB 243 originally tackled one of the core problems with childcare, which is that you need a lot of people to care for children properly. Because as anyone who's had any contact whatsoever with children knows, you've got to keep your eye on them, or they'll be, sticking their fingers in power sockets, throwing themselves out of windows or whatever.
Yeah.
So you have strict staff to child ratios in state law. And so this bill, HB 243, actually sought to completely eliminate those staff to child ratios from the state law. And after an intense backlash, particularly after a tragic death at a daycare center where a child wasn't supervised properly, it was amended to just weaken those ratios instead. So for infants under 2, the number of children per adult doubled from 1 to 6 to 1 to 12. For kids aged 2 to 5, it moved from 1 to 12 to 1 to 24. So that's actually quite a massive increase.
Okay, but I cannot imagine being a single person in charge of 24 kids who are in daycare age. That is pure chaos.
Yes.
All right. So these ratios didn't just come from anywhere or nowhere. They're based on developmental research and safety guidelines. So when you double the number of kids per adult, you're not just changing a number, you're changing the entire childcare experience.
So at this point, let's just stop and think for a moment about exactly how much childcare costs in the US. So anybody who's had kids probably have their own horror stories about this, but they do vary wildly across the country, as you might expect. According to care.com, they generally range from about $400 to $1,500 per month for infant care, with some areas exceeding $2,000. Annual costs can range from $5,357 to $17,171 per child. The national average is around about $11,000 a year, which does put that child tax credit into perspective there, doesn't it? And if you dig into Project 2025, you'll find that proposals to eliminate federal funding requirements are tied to quality standards. So Idaho's move lines up right with that vision. It's let the market decide, and if the quality drops, that's just parental choice. But at the end, maybe it will bring down some of these costs.
Ah, yes, the famous parental choice. We see it popping up all over the place, except for the choice of actually becoming a parent. Okay, let's zoom out. So this isn't just Idaho, right? Walk us through the states participating in what your blog called a national movement.
Yes, there's a lot of bills actually, and some of them are all right. Some of them are down this road. A lot of them are genuinely trying to tackle this conundrum, which is how do you maintain quality standards, maintain safety of kids while reducing these completely exorbitant costs. So we identified about 67 bills across 13 different states that address either the staff to child ratio question or worker qualifications, which is another key part of it, of course, or various other issues to do with regulation of childcare. Some of the most aggressive changes came from Tennessee. So Tennessee passed HB 106 and SB 1288 as a bill pair, and they carve out a massive licensing exemption for short-term and situational childcare like gym care and even daycare for children of athletes or professional sporting events and so on. Those facilities don't need to meet staff training or safety requirements.
Okay. And again, that lines up with Project 2025's push to exempt faith-based or community-based care from regulation. So fewer rules, more carve outs. What's happening in Minnesota?
Well, Minnesota has what you might call a legislative buffet. Bills like SF 2991 and HF 628 would raise capacity limits for group homes, reduce staffing requirements, and redefine qualifications so fewer staffers actually need formal training,
Hmm.
which obviously means that you can pay the unqualified staff less and save money. Another bill, SF 1642, lets providers exclude their own children from the total head count, which is interesting. So instead of
Hmm.
being counted towards a max of 10 kids, they can now have 12 in total.
And let me guess, framed as reducing burden and supporting the providers.
Exactly. And then this is really the deeper layer, isn't it? So if we just take a closer look at what Project 2025 actually proposes, it wants to abolish the Office of Childcare, which is inside HHS. So that office currently oversees things like training requirements and licensing standards, which are tied to federal funding. Without it, there's no enforcement mechanism. So what Minnesota's doing now, well, that could actually become national policy if Project 2025 gets implemented.
Okay, so we also saw Connecticut's House Bill 6H39, which increases the number of kids allowed in a family care home from 9 to 12. And as somebody that went to a family home for childcare as a kid, I think we had around 6 people, and it was chaos. And poor Kathy Bowles, God rest her soul, she was a trooper. But this is a 33% increase. And in North Carolina, they have Senate Bill 528, which lowers the educational standard for providers. What's the long-term vision behind all of these?
Well, it's in essence about reshaping what we define as childcare. Under Project 2025, formal licensed care is portrayed as expensive, elitist, and government controlled. Perish the thought. Informal, home based, or church based care, well, that's acceptable and accessible. And it aligns with family values. So these bills chip away at licensing, staff requirements, and inspections, all to support this ideological shift to mom knows best.
Okay. And what about the money? Is anyone investing in quality care?
Well, yeah, a few states are. And this is obviously the corollary, isn't it, of taking away the funding and relaxing standards so that things get cheaper. You can say, well, maybe the state should actually subsidize this and then it will become cheaper. So Utah's HB 410 is an interesting example. It links childcare to local housing and transit reinvestment funds. So it seems like a really smart way to expand facilities without waiting on those federal dollars. But most states pushing quality care, they're not pairing it with new investments. And this fits in with Project 2025's goal to phase out federal childcare subsidies entirely and shift the responsibility to states or, more likely, to parents.
We're also seeing changes to how care is delivered. Your blog mentioned 2025's plan to promote childcare provided by parents at home, which sounds lovely until you realize that it's a euphemism for eliminating support for working families, especially for single parents.
Yes, that's right, really. So Project 2025 critiques dual income households and frames formal care as a breakdown of the nuclear family. So the solution is stay-at-home parenting. And if that's not financially viable for millions of families, well, that's not really addressed.
Yes, it is the era of you need a dual income household. There's a reason why Dink is so popular online. Not sure if you know what that means, but it's dual income, no kids.
Yes.
All right. So what we've got is essentially a perfect storm. Deregulation at the state level, a federal plan to eliminate oversight, and a messaging strategy that calls it all freedom and family choice.
Yep. The White House is apparently due to issue a plan for increasing the birth rate in May. Now, we don't know what's going to be in that report yet, but it's a fair assumption that Project 2025 will feature quite heavily, we think. So expect to see these ideas making it to the national stage and no doubt provoking all sorts of outrage. But as we've seen in Idaho and elsewhere, freedom comes with real trade-offs, really. So more kids per adult, less supervision, and tragically real consequences when the system fails. And I've been through this with my own kids. We had to send them to daycare, and when they're really little, in particular, it's quite terrifying. You go around these childcare, and you're trying to as you walk around, you're just trying to decide, is this place suitable for my kids, or are they all monsters? And as soon as the door closes, they'll be, doing all sorts of them. And you have all these thoughts in your head. And one of the things that reassures you, certainly that reassured me, was the fact that they complied with all of the national regulations. And they
Yes.
said, we have all of these ratios, we have all of these rules, we have all these controls, all our staff are qualified to this level. And that sort of that really reassures you. It means that you can sort of have a reasonable peace of mind when you actually go out to work.
Yes, I feel like that is exactly the point of a lot of this regulation on the federal level is to give us all a reasonable peace of mind that things at the very lowest level are covered. Our food is the very lowest level of safe. Our kids, at the very least, have people that know the Heimlich or CPR, whatever it is.
Absolutely.
And we could just at the lowest level have an expectation of safety.
Absolutely.
And good. But
And one of these bills, when it was being debated, one of the proponents, the Republican proponents of one of these bills said, but parents know best. Parents can do their own due diligence on these childcare facilities. I'm thinking, really? Like, do we have the time to do that? How are we supposed to become experts in childcare and somehow go in there and know whether, oh, well, actually, they've got 5 kids in this room instead, and there's 6 over there. So I don't know. I mean,
right.
you can't know that. You have to trust that genuine experts have set the rules and that this institution is obeying those rules, so therefore your kid's going to be safe.
Well, and also inherently, you're not there to supervise, so you don't know what's happening. Like I've heard tons of stories over the years of people sneaking in kids or the providers' kids hiding somewhere where there's drop off and then coming out during the day. There's just it's a lot. Okay, all right. So that's all for today's episode. If you're feeling fired up, overwhelmed, or just mildly anxious about who's watching your kids while you work, congrats, you are paying attention.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll be back next week with more legislation, hopefully not more horror stories, less nap time, and just enough sarcasm to keep it all moving along.
This has been Beyond the Bill Number. Keep your ratios low and your research deep beyond that bill number.